Hi, this is Professor Greta Kishbaugh, and thank you for tuning into the podcast, Biz Dynamics Academy Leadership and Management Review, where we talk to local authors or local leadership experts on all topics from management of our HR employees all the way to anything in the educational sector. Since I'm a professor, I'd like to interview leaders and managers who can not only give me a better perspective of how to be better leaders, but can also share this information with students who are taking management, leadership, and business courses. Today, I'm lucky to have Dr. Katrina Esau. She is an amazing CEO and president of KE3 Worldwide Enterprises, LLC. I'm lucky to have her today because not only is she a business consultant in management, leadership, and financial services, she's also an esteemed author and an award-winning author of a whole series of books now on healing and hope for women who have been in distressful relationships. Her newest book, The Pain of Infidelity Births Purpose. She also has accompanying workbook programs which will walk you through the W.H.O.L.E method, W.H.O.L.E. That's wives healing openly, leaving him exalted. This is a tough book to read because it has a lot of stories in here that a lot of us can relate to. Misshapen relationships, misuse of loyalty, trust, and it's her story of how she overcame all of those issues, dealing with family, with trust in her husband, and most of all, trust in herself. So today I've asked her to talk about leadership and management and what she's learned not only from her experience in writing her story, but also in her experience of leading people forward now that we're in times of uncertainty and a lot of us are dealing with many issues that have come out of being stuck at home during the COVID crisis. So I'm very lucky to have Dr. Katrina, and enjoy. Hi, everybody. It's Professor Greta Kishbaugh, and I'm very lucky today to have a guest. She is an author and a survivor of relationships and love, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But the reason why I've asked her to come today is to talk about her leadership and what she's learned from her experience, and not only the trials and tribulations that she's gone through, but how has leadership helped her move on. And now she is becoming, an advocate for women, not just women who are struggling in a relationship, but women who need that extra push to move forward. And it's Dr. Katrina Esau, and she's an amazing woman. She has a MBA, and she is also just an amazing author. She's got a few books. The one that I've just read is The Pain of Infidelity Births Purpose. There is a blueprint to becoming whole. And she's going to explain that. That's an acronym, and I hope she can explain that for us too. So Dr. Katrina, it's welcome today. Thank you for coming. Tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll get right into talking about leadership.
Nice. Thank you so much, Professor Greta, for having me today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. As you mentioned, my name is Dr. Katrina Esau, and I do have my MBA as well in business leadership, as well as my undergrad, and also my doctoral degree is also in organizational leadership. I've been in the financial industry now for a little over 20 years, so have a lot of experience there. I also am a full-time, my day job is ops consultant, so I do some consulting work as well. And so I've really just, it's been an honor, like I said, to be an advocate for women, to help women, to motivate women, to encourage them, because a lot of the things we go through in our personal lives, we definitely take that into our business world. So it's been great to kind of, glean and learn from the skill sets that I've learned in corporate America, as well as to transition those over to ministry and to be in my personal development.
Okay, great. And so you've got a couple of books out, and they all focus around relationships and your personal experience. So tell me a little bit about how it came about to actually write the book. What was the antithesis to, I got to get this story out, and people need to hear my story?
So it's kind of interesting because originally when I started thinking about it, I knew, number one, when I went through this, it couldn't be just for me. It had to be for somebody else, number one. So I knew for many years that there was a book in me, But for whatever the reason, last year, it just began to brew even more so. So it was important because I began to meet women that were either divorced, they were separated, they were having struggles in their lives. And I found myself more and more sharing the story, my story of infidelity and how I made it through. And so then I began to do some research and see that the numbers, like literally there was a research done, and it's 1 in every 2.7 couples have experienced infidelity. So it's a huge need for it. And the one thing that I think hit me the hardest was, you're talking about those that actually shared. There are so many more that go through infidelity and cheating and will never admit to it. So those numbers can be much larger. So when I began to see stuff like that, I knew then that I'm not going to meet everybody in the world. So it needed to be written. It needed to be made available to those women around the world, not just locally that, are in my sphere of influence or my sphere of speech or reach, but it needed to be available to women everywhere. So that's what kind of drove me to say, hey, it's time. You need to share your story. Because for the longest time when I walked through it, we feel like we're alone, that there's nobody else. You walk through the shame, the guilt of it. And so once you're free from that, it's time to help somebody else.
Perfect. So I'd like to focus a little bit. We talked about leadership. We talk about, what we need to, how we need to get women back, back on top. And some of the things I've noticed from your book, one of the things that you've talked about is accountability. And that's a big story, taking responsibility for your actions. So can you tell me a little bit about why that's important for leaders and managers today to be accountable?
To me, accountability and taking responsibility is huge. I learned that in one of my first corporate jobs. The one thing that they taught us is you own your own growth. And that has stuck with me for over almost 25 years. And so it's always been important that you have to own it. It doesn't matter who was right, wrong, or indifferent. It's not about pointing blame. Own your piece in whatever it is. And as leaders, we have to do that. I think when we, especially when you're a leader of people, people, associates, they appreciate when you have a leader that says, okay, I understand that this happened, maybe I didn't communicate something clearly, or whatever the case may be. But I find that when you own it and when you take responsibility, and not just you own it, but also hold that other person accountable, we have to remove the excuses, we have to remove the blame, and we literally have to, put processes in place and steps in place of that accountability and help one another to grow.
Okay, excellent. I agree. I think that's very important. So we'll continue on that vein. Just communication is a big part in your book too, and the lack of. No offense, but I read it and it didn't seem like anybody was on the same page. So just can you talk a little bit about that to expand upon communication? Tell me why, not only in business and but also in life, why communication is so important.
Communication is huge, as you mentioned. If we don't communicate to people, it's doomed for failure. And I don't care what relationship you're in. The one thing that I learned along the way with communication is a lot of times we have what I call unspoken expectations. So just because we've been together 15, 20 years, I'm expecting you to know that you ought to do this. You ought to, treat me this way. You ought to know that I love to have quality time. No, we as adults have to open our mouths and say something. It's not fair to the other person to assume that they know. And the other thing that was huge for my husband and I when it came to communication is we had different styles. He was one where he would like to get out everything that he had to say, and then he was done with the conversation. Well, that's not communication. You get to talk, I get to talk. Yeah. So, and the other thing that we learned was you have to, okay, when somebody says something, let me tell you what I heard. And when you reiterate what you heard, they have the opportunity to say, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said, and they can restate it. And when you don't have that, it's danger. I like to say it's a dangerous place. And it's the same when we're in corporate America, when we're in business as leaders, as women. We have to voice our concerns. We can't assume that somebody knows. We can't assume that somebody else is going to say something. We have to own it. We have to communicate. And the one thing about communication, the biggest part of communication is listening. And one thing I ask people, are you listening to learn or are you listening to respond? There is a difference. And so we can't just be on our edge of our seats waiting for you to break for us to jump in there, because then we're not really listening and processing. It's not about the growth of it. So that's very, very important in leadership. We have to make sure that we are communicating. We have to make sure that we are listening. We have to be aware of the different cues. Our verbal communication says a whole lot more, or the physical, the outer, what our appearance says a whole lot more than our words will ever say.
Actions, movements, all of it. Good.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And so what we'll do now is women then that are going through, we talked briefly about the COVID, and women and men that might be struggling in their relationships right now. What kind of advice can you give the couples right now to maybe get out of this funk, or what's moving forward?
The one thing I like to share with people is, let's sit down and have a real conversation. With COVID, we are now in a place where we have to be home. We have to be with one another. Whereas we're used to, okay, at least I get 10 hours away, I get 8 hours away, you have a break. So you have those moments. But what I like to say is, now we have to go back to why we really got married. Why did we get married? What drew us? What was, what was that love connection? What was going on? And we have to pull on that. We have to sit down. We have to have real conversations with one another. We can't, this is more than ever. We have to sit down and have a conversation. And one of the things I always say, we have to agree to disagree. This is not a fight. Tell me how you're feeling. I'll tell you how I'm feeling. And then let's talk about it, and then see how can we, make some changes. But if we're not open and honest, and the one thing we have to be also careful of is, when you have those conversations, be ready for what you might hear. It might not be what you want to hear. But if you're going to get past it, you have to address it. I always say you cannot conquer what you won't identify. And that's the biggest thing is, we put stuff away. We put it, we call it the elephant in the corner, the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to deal with it. And it's like, I don't care how many clothes you put on top of it, how many times you walk past it, it's there. And truth be told, it comes up, it rears its ugly head when you least expect it. So I would say to any couple that may have tension or some strain or some stress, is to let's have a conversation. And then what? Maybe we have to change the environment. Because sometimes, if we're used to having conversations at the table and it always turns into an argument, let's not sit at the table. Let's go for a walk. Let's sit outside. Let's go to the park. We have to be willing to do the work, and we can't expect one to do more than the other. Let's focus on us and do our part. I always say, search within.
I like that. Changing the environment. That's a great idea. Get up and do something different than you would. We've all had to adapt in this situation. Well, good. That's about all I have for questions today, and we can continue this conversation. I'll have you back. But right now, what I'd like you to do for me is tell me how people can reach you, and tell me what you got coming up, because this will air pretty quickly. So tell us about the workshops that you have coming up in August.
Absolutely. We have, it's a 3-part webinar. It's called I Am Designed to Withstand. It starts August 15th. Folks can find out more information about it on my website at www.drkatrinaesau.com. That's DRKATRINAES like Sam, AU.com. Also, they can find the book on my website. There's also the accompanying journal that they can get there as well. Folks can connect with me on Facebook. I'm on KE3 Worldwide Enterprises is my business page, and they can also connect with me on LinkedIn at Dr. Katrina Esau, as well as on Instagram as well, Dr. Katrina Esau.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today, and we'll have another conversation. Let's wait a few more weeks and then see how everything is going. And because I'd like to know too now, when we get back to work, I'd like to see how the dynamics are changing again, and talk more about that as well, as when people start going back to their regular 9 to 5, if that ever is going to be regular again. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today.
Okay. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. In the description of each podcast, we have information on our guests and their websites and their contact information. If you want to learn more about what they do in their business, go ahead and reach out to them. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.